Ira Chaleff is back. He was a former Scientology and Sea Organization executive in charge of major organizations. He then left and had to start his career over from nothing. In this part of the interview, we're going to discuss why he left Scientology, what the mission holder revolt had to do with it, and then how he started over with absolutely nothing and became a noted author, lecturer, workshop presenter, and business productivity consultant. It's going to be an interesting story. Stay tuned. Welcome everybody back to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name's Mark Fisher, and I'm with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. Hi, Janice. How you doing?
Doing good. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great.
Good. G'day, everybody, and welcome to Scientology Peeling the Onion. And I'm just going to get right into this, and we'll get started with our returning guest, Ira Chaleff. We're doing part 2, and he's got some great stories. So hang in there, and let's bring Ira on.
Okay. Hi, Ira. How you doing?
Hi there, Mark. Hi, Janice. Good to be back.
Hi, Ira. Good to have you back.
Ira, why don't you just go ahead and just give us a quick summary of what we went over in part 1 and about your story and why we're doing this whole thing, and then we'll get started where we left off.
Sure. Well, in part 1, I went through my early life and how I got deeply interested in social justice and then in spiritual awakening, and how that led me into Scientology, and then how that led me into the Sea Org. And we ended off with actually this shot of the castle as it was at that time at St. Hill,
right, and
the office that I worked in up in the church, and that I had spent, many years being a senior executive or commanding officer of one or another of our advanced organizations or St. Hill organizations. So then we're now at the point where we're going to look at how do I understand what this was all about, because I'm shortly going to tell you about how I came to leave the Sea Org. But there's a question that most people want to know when they found out that I was in Scientology. And they go, well, how could you have done that? You were smart, you were an honor student, you were at University of California at Berkeley,
right,
one of the best institutions. You were clearly very bright. How did you get kind of sucked into what you later realized was a cult? I had to really sort of figure that out myself. And one of the resources that I used was this book that you're probably well aware of by Dr. Stephen Kent, From Slogans to Mantras. And what this book was designed to do, he took 10 cults and he divided them into 5 religious cults and 5 therapeutic cults. And he put Scientology into the therapeutic cult category. And he examined in great detail, why did people like me? Because there were quite a few people like me who came from a anti-authoritarian kind of culture in the early 60s, and then willingly went into authoritarian cultures like Scientology.
Right.
And what I came away from that with that really resonated for me, it's hard to remember now how deeply concerned we were about the real prospect of nuclear annihilation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
Yeah. And it seemed to us that the regular political processes were not going to effectively deal with it. So when a charismatic came along, like Hubbard was, and said, well, we have a way to undercut all of this and to save humanity from this, dire prospect of self-destruction, I, of course, got pretty interested in. And my, let's say, my higher faculties that might have questioned the reality base of his claims were not ascendant at that time. And so, given that Scientology also had a very strong link to spirituality, because in Scientology, you were not viewed as your body, you were viewed as a spirit that inhabited a body. Between the prospect of a better world and the prospect of continuing a spiritual journey, that's how I wound up staying in Scientology as long as I did. What happened now that I left? I think that's the next question.
Yeah, yeah. Why did
Well,
you leave, and what caused you to leave?
All right.
well, I'd also like to know, how many years were you in Scientology?
Yeah. Well, I was in Scientology from beginning to end for 15 years. So let's put this in perspective. I was about 21 when I started in Scientology, and I was about 36, maybe going on 37 when I left. So
Okay.
that it's a very long time, and it's a time when many people are building their career bona fides and their income base, etc. And as you know, we were not doing any of that outside of Scientology. Um, and we have to start all over again. But it's also important to remember that this was over 40 years ago. This was 45 years ago. So
Yeah.
we're looking back at deep history and a younger version of ourselves, if you will. All
Right.
right. So here's, Mark, how I'm going to talk about this. When we start to disagree with something fundamentally, but we can't allow ourselves to recognize that disagreement because our whole world is wrapped up in this belief system and this social system, and our whole livelihood is. One of the things we do, and a number of us did this, we somatized our stress. And I developed chronic gut issues. And I had to get a medical, even before I got the medical leave of absence, I was not doing well at all. And this is when I believe I was still head. I don't know if I was commanding officer of the advanced organization, St. Hill, UK, or if I was a senior, what we call product officer then. But in any case, I was invited to come to Flag. Now, this is a very unusual thing because in the past, when I had been summoned to Flag, it was, even if it was under false pretenses, it was usually for remediation and punitive treatment for not having my organization's statistics doing well enough. But this was genuinely, I arrived there, and Bill Franks was executive director international, and Bill was trying to run this more as a normal kind of an organization. He put out some very human centered executive directors. And when I went there, I was allowed to rest. I was given the day to study. I think I got some counseling as well. And it felt like this was going to be a new era in Scientology, and I was going to be rejuvenated. What went wrong? So just before I say what went wrong, this is a picture of the last honor, if you will. This is, as you know, you can see Sue Anderson to the left
Yeah.
here, and Sue and
Yep.
I had done a mission earlier to St. Hill. Bill Franks is to my right, and Jill and Carrie Gleason are to my left. And this was at the Fort Harrison Hotel. And again, it was kind of this brief interlude where instead of being treated harshly for supposed ethics violations, you were honored, and it was a very helpful moment, and sadly so short-lived, because what was happening at the same time at the Flag Land Base was what came to be known as the Mission Holder Revolt.
Right.
I'll tell you my
Mhm.
understanding of it. You may want to add some of your own flavor to it. Those who aren't familiar with Scientology may not understand that Scientology had different sectors of how it did its work in the world. We were in the Sea Organization, which was the most dedicated sector, where we literally lived communally and worked. Um, it was 7 days a week we lived and worked together. The mission holders, who originally were called franchise holders, instead had quite a different business model. These were privately owned. They were only allowed to give the lowest levels of Scientology training and counseling. And they tended to be so much closer to the reality of the public with whom they were working. Their premises tended to be very bright, kind of exuding a sense of success and affluence. And they were a great feeder line into all of the higher level organizations. I particularly developed a very good relationship with all of the LA area mission holders, as well as mission holders across the United States, when I was heading the American St. Hill organization, because I knew that they were, vital to my success.
Right.
What happened at that time, as far as I know, and Janice, you may want to chime in here, was that um, at flag level, I'm not sure where it came from Hubbard himself or the Commodore's Messengers organization. They started to put much more control on the mission holders, and in fact, started to take over some of the businesses which were private, and pretty much um, just what would be the word, appropriated them for Scientology, for the organization itself. Well, this produced a huge blowback, and
Right.
something like about 100 mission holders showed up at Flag Land Base to protest this.
My understanding, because my job was gopher in charge during this time period. I'd been removed for disaffection, and I was having to catch gophers out on the golf course at the Gold Base. So I only heard bits and pieces, but my understanding on it was the mission holders had upsets, and they went to Bill Franks, who was the executive director international. And Bill tried to get it resolved. And instead, it was reported up to Hubbard that the mission holders had mutinied. And that's when Hubbard sent instructions down and ordered the formation of the finance police and to go in and raid these missions. And mission holders were always out ethics, and basically just take control of the missions and get rid of the guys causing trouble, which surprised me when I heard this. And I also know it surprised Mary Sue, because that destroyed the whole feeder line to the orgs.
Yes.
Those missions were, yes, they were franchises. They were run by the mission holders and through Worldwide, Mission Office Worldwide, which Hubbard was changing over into Scientology Missions International, where to be a mission holder, you needed to purchase so many thousands of dollars worth of books, which was then 10% royalties to Hubbard for every SMI package that was sold. So instead of the mission holders being a feeder line to Scientology and the purpose being to get people up to the orgs, it was switching over more to doing packages to buy all these books and create new missions.
Right.
And these other guys, Hubbard was making more money that way. That's the only thing I could see on it, why it was being done. But these old mission holders, they had built up these missions. They had even become multi-mission holders, and they were the big opinion leaders in the field, sending people into Scientology and up to the orgs. But they were also known for taking trained auditors from the orgs. And that did used to upset Hubbard, because the orgs would get someone trained, that person's contract would be up, and then next thing you know, the class 8 or the class 6 is working for a mission. And those missions, some of them became bigger than the orgs. You look at Martin Samuel's mission, Davis mission, and he had San Francisco, and even Alan Walters, he had Dallas, and well, I'm not sure if he had Dallas or if that was Dean Stokes. But Stokes. Alan had 5 missions, including Columbus and various other places. So these guys became big opinion leaders. And then you had mission holders like Kingsley, Wimbush, Kingsley Wimbush. Kingsley came up with his own technology called de-dinging. And that, when Hubbard heard about that, he went off, and that was why Kingsley ended up getting declared. But it became part of the whole thing of the mission holders being out of control. Now, I don't know what reports were being sent up to Hubbard, but it kind of surprised me that he treated them all like this, because in the past, you know, he'd have like Ray and Pam Kemp come to the ship and have them go through an ethics handling and auditing and return them to Orange County Mission. And so he had them all handled like that, more individually, but this became a group thing with the finance police going out and emptying all these missions' bank accounts by fining them and kicking people out. I went out and did an observation mission because it was like, why is the mission network stats still crashing in non-existence? And I went out there. I went to Portland and San Francisco and a bunch of other places. And I came back and I'm like, the finance police are what's destroying this network. And
so this is an example of the command and control method of management that was antithetical to the mission holder, which was really based on a free enterprise.
That's right.
It was.
That's exactly right.
Was.
Now, let me pick up this narrative here. By the way, you mentioned Alan Walters, who's there in the front of this picture, and Dean Stokes, who's behind him. I might say, for those who've never been exposed to Scientology, watching this, that cross is actually an 8-pointed cross. So it's meant to, I believe it was meant to kind of give the feel of a Christian cross to legitimize Scientology, but for Scientologists, it was an 8 dynamics, which were the 8 different ways in which you thought about life.
Right.
So now let me carry on with my on the ground story there.
Okay.
Because, so I was at the Flagland base when this was happening. And you're right, that an order was sent down to remove Bill Franks, which was a real blow since he was actually bringing sanity into the management. Mm-hmm. And David Miscavige showed up there.
Yep.
And David knew me from when he was a kid at St. Hill, and I was either a senior officer or the commanding officer at St. Hill. So he recognized me, and he, big smile, hi, Ira. Boy, that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, but what happened was, these guys, this was like for 3 days running, the amount of charge that was blowing off, the anger, the upset was enormous. And then the other person who was there, besides all the mission holders, was the assistant guardian for the U.S., Bob Thomas. And I'm not sure why Bob was there, but Bob was also a kind of problematic character in that he was always trying to get out from under the Guardian office worldwide, to have a direct chain of command to Mary Sue Hubbard. And of course, that did not go well with the Guardian office worldwide, Jane Kember.
Right.
So remember that I had a very good relationship with mission holders. So one day I was with, and I also had a very good relationship with Bob Thomas. Why? Because when I was head of the American St. Hill organization, 10% of our gross revenue every week went to the U.S. Guardian's office. That was what their budget was based on. So
Right.
they were very supportive of me, and actually Mary Sue was as well. So I was in one of these guys' rooms with Alan and Bob and myself talking. Bob was sort of trying to get me to be executive director international, which would have been a disaster. And Alan was correctly saying, Bob, they'll kill him. Don't do that to him. And a messenger comes down and says, let me see if I get this right. Oh, the messenger comes down and says, Jeff Walker, class 12, is to do a security check on Alan Walters and Bob Thomas tomorrow, and left. And Bob turned to Alan and said, the old man, meaning Hubbard, is back on the lines, and this is all over. And it's true, of course. Terry Gleason became executive director international. Kerry knew me well, and he knew Ron Hopkins well, who was also there for some reason. And he wanted us to go back, go back to the St. Hill to run that organization, and Ron Hopkins to run the UK. So I did that for a little bit, but I kept having these gut issues, and I had to take a medical leave of absence. And while I was on a medical leave of absence, I found out that my sister, this is a picture of my sister, who lived in Toronto, had been in the hospital for a month. And she was in great danger. No one stays in the hospital for a month. They couldn't figure out what was going wrong with her. So I then got a leave to leave England, and I went to Toronto to help my sister pull through it, which I did at that time. While I was there, I was declared a suppressive person, persona non grata, mainly because of my involvement with the mission holder revolt, and also some other stupid trumped up charges, as usually happens.
Who declared you? Who declared you?
It was something, who knows? It was, the Ethics Officer International or something. I took about 20 minutes to think about this, because I know the system. I knew how to get out of that if I needed to. But I thought, no, this is it. Enough is enough. I'm no longer going to play this game. And instead, I took care of a few things, which I won't go into right now, because again, the story will get too long and complicated. But I spent about another month in East Grinstead, near St. Hill, getting things in order. And then I had to ask myself, now what?
Right.
What will my life consist of now?
Right.
All right. So I went back to the U.S. In fact, Neil Sarfati put me up at his apartment in Queens for a month. well, I tried to figure out um, what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. I have a dear cousin who since passed away who handed me this book, What Color's Your Parachute? It's a book.
I've heard I've heard that book before from somewhere else.
I know where, Janice. Jeff Hawkins.
Jeff Hawkins. Okay.
So
Yeah.
this book is about mid-career people who find themselves needing to change careers.
Right.
And they describe, the state that it's very typical to go, well, I don't know what I'm qualified for. I was very specialized in what I did. How can I transfer now to something else? In my mid 30s here, for God's sake.
Ira, we went through the same thing ourselves when we left the Sea organization. Nothing interested me, and I had to find out what it is that I could do now because I'd lost my purpose in the Sea organization in Scientology. Now what am I going to do?
Exactly. So what
Yeah.
I found, I actually did the exercises in this book. And there were some really good exercises. And one of them was to make up, if you could do anything in the world, don't even worry if there's a name for this job, what would it be? And I, in my hubris, because of course we as Scientologists and operating Satans could do anything, in my hubris, I said, well, I would be an advisor to the President of the United States, of course. So then the book very wisely asked, well, if you're not really qualified to do that just yet, what would be a step in that direction? And I found out, actually, on the plane coming back from England, I sat next to a woman who we struck up a great relationship. And it turned out that she wrote speeches for political figures in the New York Senate, I think it was. And I thought, wow, you could be a staff member to a lower level political figure and, sort of learn the ropes and earn your way up the, that career path. So that's what I did. I have this letter that I left with from, you see, it says the House of Commons, London.
Mm-hmm.
It was signed by Arthur Lewis, who is a member of Parliament. I was able to get help to get this letter from Arthur Lewis through a man named Ted, Dorothy and Ted Hamlin, who they were medical doctors in the UK who were Scientologists, and Ted did a lot of PR work with for Scientology, and he had a very good relationship with Arthur Lewis, member of Parliament. And so, as you can see, he wrote this. I don't know if you can see it or not, but he wrote this letter to Jack Kemp. Jack Kemp was a conservative member of the House of Representatives who later was on the vice presidential ticket. The recommendation of our mutual friend, Dr. Edward Hamlin. I should like to introduce Mr. Ira Chaleff to you. I am assured he is a firm supporter of your fiscal philosophy and your vision of America's future. Also, that he is a highly competent administrator and communicator who would be an asset to your office or another congressman's who is fighting the good fight. I'm pleased to recommend him to you. This was obviously a very valuable document for me to have.
Yeah.
And, bless Ted Hamlin, bless Arthur Lewis, and bless Jack Kemp. I actually met with Jack Kemp, who is a really fine man. He
was a very close confidant of Ronald Reagan, and as a matter of fact, wasn't he was involved in structuring the tax cuts at that time for Reagan, right?
That's exactly right. And he also was a former quarterback in the NFL. and a really intellectually interesting man. He was very much for free market economics,
Yeah.
and he wanted to set up enterprise zones because he also understood the African American experience because you know it was said of him that he showered with more African Americans than you've ever met as an NFL player, you
Yeah.
know. And so he was terrific. So I met with him, but unfortunately, I was still so naive. I didn't even know what to ask for. So I kept, it was very cordial, but I didn't know what to ask for. So he didn't know how to help me. Um, so I kept my search, and I found that there was this group called the Congressional Management Foundation. Um, and at the time, the director of it was trying to set up a job placement service. So I reached out to him and I said, I'd like to get a job, a low level job in Congress. He said, well, we don't really do that. That never really got off the ground. I said, what do you do? And he said, well, we help congressional offices to manage themselves better because they get elected because of their politics, but that doesn't mean they know how to manage anything. Well, I said, well, I know how to manage. And, obviously we did learn a lot about management.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said, I'd like to work with you. And he said, well, actually, we're almost broke. We don't have any money. So I said, okay, well, how about I intern for you for free? And I'll do that for 3 months. And you teach me how Congress works. And he said, okay. And I said, I'll try to use, my management and marketing skills to, rehabilitate your financial status. And he said, okay. And so I did that, meanwhile, working part time in the evenings to sort of keep some income coming in. And it took 4 months, but we really did it. We got the contracts we needed, and he was able to give me a salaried position. So, that was a great example of just having enough confidence in yourself and staying on
Yeah.
the purpose line that you could forge your own path. So while I was, you'll recognize this is Jill Gleason again. This is Pam Hurwitz, Jay Hurwitz's wife.
Oh, okay.
They were in Washington, and I took them through the Capitol because by this time I was a little bit of an insider. But
Right.
Mark, you would sort of want to know, how did I learn how Congress worked? Well, one of the things we did was get a grant to host visiting members of legislators from emerging democracies, particularly in Asia. So this is me with a group of legislators. I'm not sure if they were from the Philippines or from Thailand, but we would construct a 2-week program exposing them to the ins and outs of how Congress worked. And what I would do is I would get insiders who really knew how Congress worked to be on different panels or to give them tours. And because I was hosting them, while they were learning, I was like doing a graduate program on how Congress really works. So, that was a huge part of my learning. I also would shadow the executive director who would consult with members of Congress who were having trouble with different, very logistical things like they were getting overwhelmed by the amount of letters they were receiving, and they didn't have a good mail system for dealing with. So we would go in and we would analyze their workflow process and design a better workflow process so they could get their letters answered in a reasonable amount of time, because many were taking months, and also with good enough quality that the member of Congress was satisfied that they were being well represented. So between these visiting legislative programs and shadowing my my director, I learned how Congress worked, and he then wanted to go off and do another for-profit business, and I became the executive director. So you
So
know,
you started as an intern volunteer and became the executive director?
yeah. Well, I didn't jump as from the volunteer. I first became a paid staff member for about a
Yeah.
year, and then became the executive director. It was a very small organization.
Yeah. Well, and then you went from the bottom to the top.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
No experience in that field.
That's right. But the thing was, I wasn't selling myself
Yeah.
to Congress. The Congressional Management Foundation had a reputation of being nonpartisan, working equally with Republicans and Democrats, doing good work, and not taking policy positions, helping members serve their constituents better, um, which they have to do as part of wanting to get reelected. And by doing that, without any of my own agenda, just helping them, I was able to build credibility and a real platform. And
Ira,
yeah,
can I ask you a question? Like you talked about, helping them sort out their letter answering flow and all that sort of things. It sounds like problems of work or whatever. Were you able to use like things that you learned when you were in Scientology management in order to bring this stuff about?
not much. And I'll tell you, there's a yes and a no to that answer. As you know, in Scientology, we organize all our organizations by the same organizational chart.
Right.
It had 21 departments. It was a reasonably effective description of all the functions within an organization. But it was static. The only thing that made it kind of flow was I mentioned in the last interview that we had what we called routing forms, so that when an individual came to an organization for service, the routing form took them through the different divisions in a sensible way. But our workflow processes were not as clearly established. In fact, we didn't even have the terminology workflow process. I learned it from Captain Bill. Bill Robertson, who was a outsized figure
Yes.
in the Sea Organization. When he was head of the Advanced Organization Los Angeles, and I was an executive under him, he showed us, because he had been an engineer as well as a law enforcement officer, and he showed us how to think through how particles flowed through an organization and where they could get log jammed, and how we identified the log jam, whether it was somewhere in the technical division, the qualifications division, or the ethics department, or somewhere. And I learned from him how to map out a workflow. Later on, I found, well, this is just normal, common practice in the
Right.
business world. So, no, it really wasn't Scientology that was tremendously useful. Where Scientology came in was my ability to communicate effectively,
Right.
which, again, I talked about in the last interview. Um, that was a fundamental requirement. You have to be
Yeah.
able to do that. And I also could present well, but not in terms, there was very, very little in terms of actual organizational management.
Got it.
Although I did talk a little bit about the subject of people writing up their hats, but it wasn't a big part of anything. People had they already had job descriptions, and it wasn't that innovative.
Yeah, the only reason I brought it up is because you're talking about letters. I was thinking about the communication system in Scientology management organizations, and then also speed of particle flow alone determines power. You know what I mean? In other words, if something was blocked along the lines, you wanted to unblock it, like you were talking about the routing forms or whatever, or Captain Bill pointed out, so that things would move, so that it made the organization work more efficiently.
Well, that's very interesting. I'd forgotten about, that we did hold that speed of particle flow determines power. That's kind of one of the bases of Einstein's
Yeah.
theory. And it's true that, in a sense, what I was doing was helping when I did male consultations, which was not the only kind I did, but I was helping them unjam their stuck particles and speed up the particle flow. So, in that sense, I was doing that, but again, I didn't base it on particularly on what I learned in Scientology.
Right.
So, having said that, there was still the question of I didn't have any degrees at all. I had dropped out, after 2 years out of college. And here I was now starting to be on panels, including televised panels, about how Congress worked. And the person to the left of me and the right of me would talk all about their PhDs. and whoever the moderator was will have to say, and there's Ira Chaleff. So I said, I have to remedy this. So I found an adult education program. These are now common now, but they were just beginning, where they identified that there was a big market of people like myself who had dropped out with only 2 years of college behind them. And they were now in the workplace and couldn't afford the time, let alone the money, to go back and do a traditional 2 more years program. So they developed these adult programs from accredited colleges. The National College of Education was a 100-year-old teaching university in Evanston, Illinois. But they set up a couple of remote campuses, one near Washington, D.C. And it was a 1-year program where you went one night a week for 5 hours of classroom training. And you had to develop a portfolio of that classroom training would give you 30 more credits. In the U.S., you need 120 credits to get an undergraduate degree, and on the quarter system, on the semester system. And I only had 60. So you would get 30 more credits by reason of doing this on-site training. Plus, you had to do a thesis. And I'll show you my thesis in a moment. And you got 30 more credits by developing a portfolio which showed 5 areas in which you had really become proficient, not through formal education, but through other lived experience or educational experience. So I did a very well documented portfolio, and I based it largely on a lot of the administrative training that I had received within Scientology organizations. We were very big.
Right.
We had to do the organizational executive course, which was huge, and then the flag executive briefing course.
Yeah.
So I was able to base that, and I received full credit for that. So that gave me, at least I now had some degree. But the important part of that was this doesn't show it fully. It's a degree of Bachelor of Arts in Applied Behavioral Science. That's key, because applied behavioral science was teaching us, was going over all the research that had been done about how human beings develop and how human groups work well. And I want to tell you, this was absolutely critical to my balancing out the command and control structures we had learned and lived in Scientology. If all I had
Right.
was command and control, I could not have made it in the the work I was doing. I had to unlearn some of that and learn other models for how you
Right.
develop high functioning teams.
Now, while you were doing this, were you telling anyone that you used to be a Scientologist?
No, I could not do that.
And
I could not.
okay,
I had a carefully constructed resume, which had no falsehoods in it, but never mentioned Scientology. Instead, it mentioned
right,
the St. Hill organization,
No,
the American St. Hill organization, the Advanced organization, and it described my actual, functions in it. So
right,
that that was sufficient for a volunteer, initial volunteer position, such as with the Congressional Management Foundation, um, combined with my letters of recommendation, including the one from a member of parliament, for me to be taken seriously.
no, it's
right.
a good
Now,
point, Dennis. It's a good point, Ira, because I was going to say when we left, I had no idea. I tried to put together a resume and I went, well, I can't. If I put the Scientology stuff in there, they're not, if they try to verify the resume, Scientology's not going to respond to them. I'm a suppressive person. So I thought this is not going to work. So anyway, we ended up going into business together and be self-employed. So we didn't have to be hired by anybody.
Yeah, a
well,
good solution.
I did have to submit to the state of Nevada for my mortgage license stuff. I had to submit a resume. And so Paul helped me put one together, and I was like a troubleshooter for here and there, and I'd say I'd use the abbreviations of the, CSI, for Church of Scientology International. I just didn't say what it was. Yeah.
The same strategy. But I will tell a little funny story quickly. I also, was trying to develop a social life. And because of my Jewish background, I found that it was easiest to start going to synagogue. And they had a singles program, so I could meet a lot of people. And one night I went out with a couple, and they were asking me about my background. So I sort of parroted what I had in my resume, how I had done human development work and, these sort of generalities. And the guy who worked for the Department of Justice said, "What the hell is that? That could be Scientology." So, so we were skating on thin ice. There was no question. But again,
Right.
it was prudent at the time. So
Now, can I ask you another question?
Sure.
When you were volunteering to get yourself, going, involved, what kind of work did you do to pay the bills?
Well, I had a little bit of reserves, not a lot. I had a few $1,000s my grandmother had left when she died. And there was another, they were former Scientologists in the DC area who had a contract with the Washington Post where they would recruit teams of teenagers, train them to go door to door to sell subscriptions to the Post. So I decided, well, let me do that just to keep a little bit of income coming in. But I was interested, I've always been interested, as I said in my earlier talk, in the African American community. So rather than sort of try to do this in a territory that was mainly Caucasian, I recruited a team in the inner city in the African American community, and I trained them, and we went door to door, and they would earn a little bit of money, and they would get when they reached a certain quota, they would get a savings bond, $100 savings bond that they would put in their account. And I made sure this was on the up and up, that they really got this. And it was
Right.
terrific for me because here I was during the day in the halls of power and in the evenings learning how the inner city struggled and, the huge gap between the two. So I enjoyed doing that, but I only did it for a few months because by then,
Okay.
at 4 months, I was earning a salary from the
It's funny. It's funny, Ira, you mentioned that because when I was a teenager in Scientology in the Washington, D.C. area, I actually sold door to door in the evenings with the Scientology company selling dry cleaning discount coupon books. And I
Right.
did that 2 to 3 hours a night to make money to pay for my courses and things. So it sounds like a similar type thing.
Interesting. All right, let me move on here because,
Yeah.
Mark, you had sort of asked me like, what surprised me? Yes, I went out into this new world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that surprised me was how relatively easy it was for me to get published when I wasn't, fighting the battle of the bad PR image of being of Scientology, you know. So within a couple of months, I was being quoted in the New York Times for this survey that I had developed and conducted in congressional offices, and that kind of blew me away. And then one of the ways we raised money that supported my position there was a wealthy Republican donor who actually, she's a wonderful woman. She's still alive. She's about 102. She owns the Golden Door Spa in California and Rancho La Puerta in Mexico. And she ran for in a Democratic primary for Congress and lost. But she was a very successful businesswoman. And she wanted to know if she had won, how would she get trained to do her job as a member of Congress? So she went to Washington and she found out there was no way she would get trained. There was no preparation. And so she committed her own money and got matching money from some of her clients at the spa. And she gave it to American University, to a group of academics, to write a manual for, here's what you do when you become elected as a member of Congress. And they spent a month or two starting to do their research. And they found out that it was us folks at the little Congressional Management Foundation that really understood how to do the nuts and bolts of this. So they subcontracted to us to write those chapters, which was most of the book. And so here I am, again, like this was the second edition, but I also was on the first edition.
Right.
Uh, having publishing credits, advising members of Congress. In this book,
Ira, you were putting together hat packs for congressional members.
we were doing that. Although I want to be clear that, again, I was doing it very much from a congressional office point of view, not from any Scientology management perspective. Very, very little crept in there, if anything. But this book is now in its 19th edition. It's given every single Congress. It's given to new members, updated. My name is no longer on the cover because there's so many people have contributed to it. So I'm in the acknowledgments. And then when I was completing my my college, I had to do this thesis I told you about. And the thesis I chose was, at that time, congressional budgets were being cut back, which was pretty rare. And so congressional offices were going to have to figure out what did they cut. and still serve their constituents well. So I did research on that, and with the help of another person who I credit in the acknowledgments, I wrote this book called Cutback Management for Congressional Offices, a planning and budgeting manual. And we got funding for this, published it, handed it out to every congressional office, made further press on that. And, I had an additional publishing credit and graduated with my degree. So I was very, very fortunate that my intentionality to stay on purpose and see how could I make a difference intersected with this opportunity with this little nonprofit. And it really changed. It was one of the key things that became the foundation for my new life outside of Scientology.
Right.
So Kerry Gleason, who you know well, who also had left the Sea Org, had
Right.
started his own organization called the Institute for Business Technology in Sweden, because Jill is Swedish. And he used, there was one very small part of Scientology administration, which was based on a little policy letter called Do It Now, in which Hubbard said, if you want to be really lazy, don't put things off, do it now. Kerry took this to heart when he was the commanding officer of the flag bureaus,
Yes.
and he implemented that at the desks of all the people who reported to him. When he left, he tried to sell his PR program to the second largest bank in Sweden. And he started with a branch that was doing very poorly, was at the bottom of its sector. And he gave them this program to do. But he found that they weren't doing it. So then he gave them this Do It Now, coaching. So the bank in headquarters in Sweden called him there, and that he thought they wanted his public relations program. They said, no, we have all the public relations programs we need. We want to know how you got this branch that was like fourth from the bottom out of 56 branches in its sector to implement the program so effectively, move nearly to the top. So he explained to them the coaching he did on personal efficiency. And they said, that's what we want. And so he quickly sort of codified this program, and he started and became very successful with it in Sweden. And then he took some of our other former colleagues in the Netherlands and in the UK and developed branches under license arrangements there. And he came to the US and he wanted me to do this with him. And I said, no, I am too happy doing the work I do with Congress. So I said no for a year or two. But then I thought, in the Sea Org, I made a mistake of becoming too narrowly focused, too specialized. And that's not great. You really need to be a little bit more sort of be able to do a number of different things well. And I decided that Congress was wonderful to work with, but too narrow a focus. So I found a really good replacement who was frankly more qualified than me. I turned the nonprofit over to them, and I became a partner with Kerry and Jay Hurwitz at the time in this doing the personal efficiency program in the US. We had top drawer clients. So these are just a few of them. SmithKline Beecham is now GlaxoSmithKline. And this is just a short list of many clients we had. And this was a very effective program because we didn't just teach the principles of efficiency, but we then went around to each person's desk and coached them in it. And not only did we coach them, but we came back 2 times to make over the period of about 6 weeks to make sure they were sustaining the skills. As a result, it was extremely effective, and the word of mouth would spread through the organization. So, for example, I spent 2 or 3 years in Kraft Foods doing this work in every part of Kraft Foods, and I brought other people in to help me. I was in their headquarters. I was in their Oscar Mayer processing plant. I was in their cold storage facilities in Georgia. I was in their sour cream dairy cream cheese plants in California. I was in their Nabisco plants in New Jersey, and it was amazing. Why? Not because this was my heart work. It wasn't. This was not my core purpose. But it taught me, it gave me exposure to how does corporate America work at all levels. I was working with senior executives and right down on the shop floor. And this I did this for about 3, maybe 4 years before I was ready to move back to my heart work. But now I had another advanced degree, if you will, in how corporate America worked. So it was
Ira, can I interject here? I worked under Kerry Gleason when he was the commanding officer of the Flag Bureau, and he would do these executive inspections you're talking about. He would come to your desk and he would go, "Oh, what's in your top drawer here?" And then he'd go through it, and people would have a tendency to hide work or hide things that they couldn't deal with. And he'd go and he'd look at it, he goes, what's the issue here? And oh, well, let's get this taken care of here. Here's how you do it, blah, blah, blah. I'll be back in a day or two to see that you've done it, right? And literally people would be like electrified, like, oh, I better keep my desk in order, which meant you got more efficient and you got more work done.
Absolutely. And it was a lot of fun in the days when offices were very paper intensive, which of course are so now because of electronics. We used to say, we're going to have to take everything out of your desk drawer to see what's there, and we would pile it on their desk. Yeah. So there was no going back now, and then we would give them the coaching on do it now, and how to set up a workflow system, and then how to write little mini plans. And it was extremely effective because it was so hands-on, and all kinds of funny stories would emerge. I would open the desk drawer from this one woman, and there were 200 packs of soy sauce in it. And I said, why do you have so much soy sauce? And she says, oh, because I don't like it. In other words, every time she ordered Chinese food, there was soy sauce. So she put it in her desk drawer. And, and so the amount of efficiency improvement was just terrific. So it was a lot of fun. We made good money. And more than that, for me personally, I really learned what I would need to know to help with the next phase of my post-Scientology career, which I think we'll go into next time, which is writing some, very
part 3
significant books that have found their way throughout the many facets of our society and globally as well.
That's
and
great.
Kerry, by the way, did fabulous work. His books were in 18 different languages. He really made a mark.
I even have one.
Yeah.
Personally signed by Kerry to me.
Yes, terrific.
Well,
Yeah.
Ira, this is great. We're learning a lot, and this is amazing, your story, but we'll carry on our next part that we have. In the meantime, I want to let everybody know to please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, hit that notification button. That way you know when the next videos come out. If you have any questions or comments, please go down below and you can ask any questions or comments, and we'll bring them up to Ira. And that's what we've got. What do you say, Janice?
Yeah, and I want to show something that I found. I was going through some books written by ex-Scientologists, and I found this book of poetry. That's Ira's book. It's another one
Ira
of his
wrote-
writings. Yes. Yeah, Falling Apart into Wholeness, Collected Poems, 2005 to 2020.
That's amazing.
Anyway, yeah.
Yes, I have published a number of books poetry books about once a decade, and I'll talk a little bit more about that next time.
All
Okay,
right.
good.
Well, Ira, it's great to have you here. Have you guys got anything else you'd like to say before we end the show here?
No, I've enjoyed listening to Ira.
I have too. Anyway, until next time, everybody. Ira, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Till then.
Bye-bye.